The sky above Seoul turned black that Tuesday morning when Captain Lee Jinwoo first saw them coming down from space. The massive ships were so big they blocked out the sun, completely making day look like night in seconds. People stopped walking on the streets and looked up with their mouths wide open, pointing at the giant metal things floating above their city. Lee Jinwoo stood at his post in the military command center, watching the screens that showed him what was happening all over Earth. These alien ships were not just over Seoul, but over every major city on the planet. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow. Paris all had the same dark shadows hanging in their skies like storm clouds that would never move. The ships made no sound at all, which made everything feel even stranger. Usually, when something that big moved through the air, there would be noise, but these things just hung there, silent and still, like they were waiting for something. The captain had been in the military for 15 years and had never seen anything like this in his whole life. Dr. Park Minji was in her laboratory when the alerts started going off on every computer and phone in the building. She was one of the smartest people on Earth when it came to studying life forms from other planets, even though she had never actually seen a real alien before. Today, that was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The aliens made contact exactly 3 hours after their ships first appeared. A voice came through every radio and television on Earth, speaking in perfect Korean, Chinese, English, Spanish, and every other language at the same time somehow. The voice was calm and friendly, like a teacher talking to young students. "We are the Vorthak." The voice said, "We come from far away in space where many different kinds of people live together in peace. We have been watching your world for a long time, and we see that your people suffer from sickness and pain and do not live very long lives. We want to help you." Lee Jinwoo listened to the message while looking at the readings his instruments were giving him. The alien ships had technology that was far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. Their energy signatures were off. The charts and their materials seemed to be made of things that did not exist on Earth. The Vorthak voice continued speaking. "We have a gift for the people of Earth. Something that will make all your problems go away forever. No more sickness. No more pain, no more dying before your time. We offer this gift freely because we believe all thinking beings deserve to be happy and healthy." Dr. Minji felt excited and worried at the same time. This was the greatest moment in human history, but something about the way the aliens talked made her feel uneasy. They sounded too confident, too sure that humans would just accept whatever they offered without asking questions. The alien ships began to lower small craft that came down to land in the capitals of every country on Earth. The small ships were still huge compared to human vehicles, but tiny next to the motherships that stayed floating in the sky. The landing craft were smooth and shiny like mirrors that reflected the world around them. President Kim Soo-jin of the United Earth government was the first human leader to meet with the Vorthak delegation. She walked out to the landing site in Seoul with Dr. Minji and several other scientists and military officers, including Captain Lee Jinwoo. The aliens that came out of their ship were tall, much taller than humans, with skin that looked like it was made of crystal or glass. Their bodies reflected light in strange patterns that hurt to look at directly. They had no hair, and their faces were smooth with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The Vorthak leader spoke through a small device that translated its words into perfect Korean. "I am the one you may call speaker for my people. We bring greetings from the Galactic Council, where thousands of different species work together for the good of all." Dr. Minji stepped forward and bowed politely. "We are honored by your visit," she said, "but we have many questions about your gift. What exactly are you offering us and why?" The speaker seemed surprised by her question, as if no one had ever asked such a thing before. "Most species simply accept our gift with gratitude." It said, "We offer you nanobots, tiny machines smaller than the cells in your body that will repair any damage, heal, any sickness and extend your lives for as long as you wish to live. Captain Lee Jinwoo studied the aliens, carefully watching how they moved and acted. They seemed uncomfortable with Dr. Minji asking questions. Their body language suggested they were used to other species just accepting whatever they said without question. The nanobots are completely safe. The speaker continued. We have given them to many worlds across the galaxy, and they have brought nothing but happiness and health. Every species that has received our gift has thanked us and lived better lives because of it. But how do they work? Dr. Minji asked. What are they made of? How do they know what to fix in our bodies? What happens if something goes wrong? The speaker looked at the other, Vorthak, with expressions that humans could not read. Such details are not important. It said, what matters is that they work perfectly. They will make your people happy and healthy. Is that not what you want? President Kim spoke up. We appreciate your offer, but humans like to understand things before we use them. Could you show us how these nanobots function? Could our scientists study them first? The aliens looked at each other again, and their crystal skin seemed to dim slightly. Most species do not require such study, the speaker said. They trust us and accept our gift immediately. But if you insist, we can provide demonstrations. Over the next few days, the Vorthak brought volunteers from the cities where their ships had landed. People with cancer had their tumors disappear overnight. Old people became young again. Missing arms and legs grew back perfectly. People who had been blind could see, and people who had been deaf could hear. The demonstrations were incredible, and soon everyone on Earth wanted the nanobots. But Dr. Minji insisted on running more tests. She wanted to know everything about how the tiny machines worked. Lieutenant Commander Han Woo-jin, a military strategist, also felt something was wrong about the whole situation. The Vorthak seemed to get more impatient as the days went on. They kept asking when humans would be ready to accept the full treatment for everyone. They said they had schedules to keep and other worlds to visit, but humans kept asking more questions. Wanting to understand every detail, Han Woo-jin noticed that the aliens never gave straight answers about technical details. They would talk about the benefits but never explain the actual science behind their nanobots. When human scientists asked to examine the machines more closely, the Vorthak would change the subject or say it was too complicated for humans to understand. Dr. Minji worked day and night studying the few nanobot samples the aliens had provided. She could see they were incredibly advanced, but there were parts of their programming that seemed to be hidden or encrypted. She needed more time to figure out what the nanobots were really designed to do. The world waited as scientists worked and politicians debated. Some people demanded the nanobots immediately, saying it was cruel to make sick people wait. Others agreed with Dr. Minji that more study was needed. The Vorthak ships continued to hover over every major city, casting their shadows and waiting for humanity to make its choice. Captain Lee Jinwoo knew that whatever decision Earth made would change everything forever. He just hoped they would make the right choice. Dr. Cho Hyemin had not slept in 3 days as she worked with her team of programmers to crack the nanobot security systems. They had set up a secret laboratory in an underground bunker beneath Seoul, where they could work without the aliens detecting what they were doing. Every person in the lab had refused nanobot treatment, which made them some of the few people on Earth who could still think freely. The breakthrough came when Dr. Park Soo-jin brought them more blood samples from her research. She had been studying exactly what happened in human brains when people got really angry, and she discovered something amazing. When humans felt intense emotions like rage or defiance, their brains produced chemicals that the nanobots had never encountered before. The Vorthak had tested their nanobots on thousands of different alien species across the galaxy, Dr. Cho realized, but none of those species had the same emotional range that humans did. Most aliens seemed to be calmer and more logical than humans, which meant their nanobots were not designed to handle the wild emotional storms that humans could create in their own minds. Dr. Soo-jin explained her discovery to the team. When a human gets truly furious, she said, not just annoyed, but absolutely enraged, their brain chemistry goes completely crazy. The nanobots try to suppress these emotions, but they get overwhelmed by the intensity. It's like trying to stop a flood with a small dam. This gave Dr. Cho the key she needed to hack the nanobots. She realized that if she could trigger this intense emotional response in infected humans at exactly the right moment, the nanobots would be confused and vulnerable for a few seconds. That would be enough time to upload a virus that could reprogram them completely. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Jinwoo was coordinating with military leaders around the world who had not received nanobots. The situation was incredibly difficult because they could not trust anyone who had been treated, and they had to assume that all their communications might be monitored by the aliens. General Yoon Tae-hyung, who commanded Korean forces, had managed to keep most of his elite units free of nanobots by claiming they needed to maintain readiness in case of alien attack. The Vorthak had accepted this explanation, but they were starting to ask why the delay was taking so long. Admiral Lim So-young, who controlled the Pacific Fleet, had been even more clever. She had told the aliens that military personnel needed special versions of the nanobots that would not interfere with their equipment and weapons. The Vorthak were working on these special versions, which bought the humans more time. Colonel Park Dong-yun led Special Forces teams that had been training for space combat. Without anyone knowing why, they practiced fighting in zero gravity and learned to use weapons that could work in the vacuum of space. The official story was that they were preparing for asteroid mining missions, but really, they were getting ready to attack the alien ships. The hardest part was that most of humanity did not know they were in danger. People with nanobots felt better than ever and could not understand why some humans were being suspicious of their alien benefactors. The infected humans began to pressure their governments to give nanobots to everyone immediately. Dr. Minji had to watch her own parents and brother become more and more insistent that she should get the nanobots. They could not understand why she was being stubborn about accepting such an obvious gift. They started to seem different. Somehow, less emotional and more focused on convincing others to get the treatment. Lieutenant Commander Han Woo-jin noticed the same. Changes in infected people all over the world. They were not yet under direct alien control, but their personalities were shifting. They became less questioning and more compliant. They stopped asking difficult questions and seemed to accept whatever authorities told them. The team realized that the nanobots were already changing people even before the full control systems were activated. The aliens were slowly preparing humanity for slavery by making them more obedient and less likely to resist. It was a gradual process that most people did not even notice happening to themselves. Dr. Cho finally finished her virus program, but testing it would be incredibly dangerous. If it worked, it would free the infected humans by overriding the nanobots control systems, but if it failed, it might trigger the aliens to activate full control immediately. The team would only get one chance to save humanity. Captain Lee coordinated with resistance cells in every major city around the world. They had identified key locations where they could upload the virus to local nanobot networks simultaneously. The timing had to be perfect, because once they started the attack, the aliens would respond with everything they had. The plan was more complex than anything humans had ever attempted before. At exactly the same moment, teams around the world would begin uploading the virus, while military forces attacked the alien ships. The virus would take several minutes to spread through the global nanobot network. And during that time, Earth would be completely vulnerable to alien retaliation. Dr. Minji worked with scientists in other countries to prepare multiple versions of the virus, Professor Kim Ji-soo in London, Dr. Lee Na-young in New York, and Dr. Choi Min-ho. In Tokyo, all had their own teams ready to launch coordinated attacks. They could not communicate directly because the aliens might be listening, but they had agreed on a specific time when everything would begin. The night before the attack, Han Woo-jin walked through Seoul, looking at all the people who had no idea their world was about to change forever. Families were having dinner together, couples were walking hand in hand, and children were playing in parks. Most of these people had nanobots, and did not know they might become enemy soldiers in a few hours. The uninfected humans spent their last night saying goodbye to loved ones who might not survive the coming battle. They could not explain what was really happening, because infected people might unconsciously report the information to the aliens through their nanobots. It was the loneliest feeling any of them had ever experienced. Captain Lee stood on the roof of the command center looking up at the alien ships that had been hovering over his city for months. Tomorrow, those ships would either be destroyed or humanity would become slaves forever. There was no middle ground and no second chances, as dawn approached the small group of free humans prepared to fight for their species, and for every other species, the aliens had enslaved. The Vorthak had made one critical mistake when they chose Earth as their next target. They had never encountered a species that would turn their own gift into a weapon and use it to free, not just themselves, but potentially the entire galaxy. The battle for human freedom was about to begin, and the whole universe would learn what happened when someone tried to enslave humanity. 3 months had passed since the first nanobots were given to human volunteers, and everything seemed perfect. People who had been dying were now healthy and strong. Old people looked young again, and everyone who received the treatment felt better than they had ever felt in their lives. The whole world was talking about getting the nanobots, and most governments were ready to start giving them to everyone. Dr. Cho Hyemin sat in her computer lab, staring at screens full of code that made her feel sick to her stomach. She was one of the best computer scientists on Earth, and President Kim had asked her to study the nanobots' programming to make sure they were really safe. What she found hidden deep inside the tiny machines made her hands shake with fear. The nanobots were not just medical devices like the Vorthak had said. They were also control systems that could take over a person's brain and body. There were secret programs buried in their code that could be turned on from far away. Once activated, these programs could make people do whatever the aliens wanted them to do. They could even stop people's hearts or shut down their breathing if the aliens decided they wanted someone dead. Dr. Cho printed out page after page of code and ran to find Captain Lee Jinwoo and Dr. Park Minji. She found them in the government building where they were meeting with other world leaders about when to start giving nanobots to everyone on Earth. "We have to stop this right now," Dr. Cho said as she burst into the meeting room. "These nanobots are not gifts. They are weapons. The aliens can control anyone who has them inside their body, Captain." Lee looked at the paper she handed him, even though he did not understand computer code. "Very well. What exactly are you saying?" he asked. Dr. Minji took the papers and started reading through them quickly. Her face turned pale as she saw what Dr. Cho had discovered. "These programs here," she said, pointing to sections of code, "these are designed to control human behavior. And this section here can shut down vital body functions." The room fell silent as the leaders realized what this meant. President Kim spoke first. "How long before they activate these control systems?" she asked. Dr. Cho had been thinking about that question for days. "Based on how they are talking, I think they want most of the population to have nanobots before they turn on the control systems. Maybe 70 or 80% of all humans. Once enough people are infected, they can take over the whole planet." Lieutenant Commander Han Woo-jin had been quiet during the meeting, but now he stood up and walked to the window where he could see the alien ships still floating in the sky. "This explains why they keep asking when we will give nanobots to everyone," he said. "They are getting impatient because their plan is not moving fast enough." Dr. Minji felt sick as she thought about all the people who already had nanobots in their bodies, including some of her own family members. "Can we remove the nanobots from people who already have them?" she asked. Dr. Cho shook her head. "The nanobots are too small and too integrated into people's bodies. Trying to remove them would probably kill the person, but I might be able to..." reprogram them if I can figure out how to hack into their systems. Captain Lee started making plans immediately. We need to organize resistance groups among people who do not have nanobots yet, he said. But we have to be very careful. The aliens are probably watching us, and if they find out what we know, they might activate the control systems early. The team realized they were in a terrible situation. Millions of people already had nanobots and were walking around like normal, not knowing they could be turned into slaves at any moment. Meanwhile, the Vorthak kept encouraging more people to get the treatment, and many governments were planning mass distribution programs. Han Wujin began secretly contacting military officers and government officials who had not received nanobots yet. He told them to find reasons to delay getting the treatment and to quietly prepare for possible conflict. But they had to be very careful not to let the aliens know what they were doing. Dr. Minji started studying the nanobots more carefully, trying to understand exactly how the control systems worked. She discovered that the aliens had done this many times before to other planets. The nanobots had programs designed to work on dozens of different alien species, which meant the Vorthak had been enslaving worlds across the galaxy for a very long time. The worst part was that the nanobots worked exactly as advertised for medical treatment. They really did cure diseases and extend life, which made it almost impossible to convince people that they were dangerous. People who had been saved by the nanobots could not believe that the same machines might be used to control them. Captain Lee met with military leaders from around the world. In secret locations, they had to assume that anyone with nanobots might be turned into a spy or enemy soldier at any moment. This meant they could not trust most of their own people and had to work only with the small percentage of humans who had not been treated yet. The Vorthak seemed to notice that the distribution of nanobots was slowing down. Their daily messages to Earth became more insistent. They talked about how other species had been eager to receive their gift and how humans were being ungrateful by taking so long to decide. Dr. Cho worked around the clock trying to find a way to hack into the nanobot systems. The alien programming was incredibly advanced, but she noticed that it had not been designed to handle certain types of human brain activity. The nanobots were programmed to suppress emotions like anger and defiance, but they seemed to have trouble dealing with these feelings when they became very intense. Dr. Park Soo-jin, who was Dr. Minji's sister and a brilliant biochemist, made an important discovery while studying blood samples from people with nanobots. She found that when humans became extremely angry or determined, their brain chemistry changed in ways that seemed to confuse the nanobots. The control systems would flicker and sometimes fail completely for short periods. This gave Dr. Cho an idea. If she could create a computer virus that triggered this emotional response in humans, it might be possible to disrupt the nanobots' control systems long enough to reprogram them. But it would be incredibly dangerous, because the moment they started the attack, the aliens would know what was happening. The team realized they had only one chance to save humanity. They would have to simultaneously attack the nanobot networks all over the world while fighting off the alien ships and trying to reprogram millions of tiny machines before the Vorthak could activate their control systems. It seemed impossible, but it was the only plan that had any hope of working. As they prepared for what might be humanity's last battle, the team knew they were not just fighting for Earth. They were fighting for every species the Vorthak had enslaved, and for all the worlds that might be attacked in the future. The aliens had made one mistake, though. They had underestimated human stubbornness and the refusal to accept slavery, even when it came disguised as a gift. The moment came at exactly 6 in the morning when the sun was just rising over Seoul. Captain Lee Jinwoo gave the signal, and across the entire planet teams of uninfected humans began uploading Dr. Cho virus into nanobot networks. The attack had to be perfectly coordinated because if even one city failed, the aliens could use their infected humans as weapons against the free cities. Dr. Cho watched her computer screens as the virus began spreading through the nanobots in Seoul. The program worked by triggering intense anger in infected humans, which confused their nanobots just long enough for the virus to take control. But she knew the Vorthak would notice what was happening within minutes. The alien response was immediate and violent. The massive ships that had been floating peacefully over every major city suddenly came alive with weapons and defensive systems. They began firing energy beams at the locations where the virus uploads were happening, trying to stop the human resistance before it could spread. But something unexpected happened as the virus reached infected humans around the world. Instead of becoming angry for just a few seconds like Dr. Cho had planned, they became absolutely furious in ways that surprised even. The nanobots had been suppressing human emotions for months, and when those feelings suddenly came flooding back, people experienced rage like they had never felt before. Lieutenant Commander Han Woo-jin led the first ground attack against Vorthak, forces that had landed near Seoul. The aliens had expected to fight primitive human weapons, but instead they found themselves facing enemies who could heal from injuries instantly and coordinate their attacks with perfect timing through the reprogrammed nanobots. The freed humans discovered that their nanobots were now working for them instead of against them. The tiny machines that had been designed to control them were now enhancing their strength, speed, and endurance while allowing them to communicate with each other instantly. It was like every human on Earth had suddenly become part of a giant network. Minji watched in amazement as infected people all over the world began fighting back against the aliens with abilities they had never had. Before, the nanobots were sharing tactical information between every freed human, creating a collective intelligence that could respond to threats faster than any individual could think. The Vorthak had never faced anything like this before. In all their conquests across the galaxy, they had fought individual species that became slaves once the nanobots were activated. But humans had turned their own enslavement devices into weapons and were now fighting as a single coordinated organism with billions of connected minds. Captain Lee coordinated the space battle from his command center as human pilots enhanced by reprogrammed nanobots began attacking the alien fleet. The Vorthak ships were enormous and heavily armed, but they had been designed to intimidate and control rather than fight desperate resistance. The human pilots found that their nanobots allowed them to withstand forces that would normally kill them and gave them reflexes fast enough to dodge alien weapons. They could also share information instantly with other pilots, creating attack patterns that the aliens could not predict. Or Counter General Yoon Tae-hyung led ground forces against alien troops in major cities around the world. The Vorthak soldiers were tall and strong, but they had been used to fighting enslaved populations that could barely resist. Now they faced humans who fought with the fury of people who had almost lost their freedom forever. The battle was not going well for the aliens. Their ships were taking heavy damage, and their ground forces were being overwhelmed by humans who seemed to be everywhere at once and knew exactly where to attack. The Vorthak had never lost a planet before, and they did not know how to respond to this kind of resistance. Dr. Cho made an incredible discovery while monitoring the virus spread. The nanobots were not just freeing humans, they were also detecting other nanobots in the alien ships. When she analyzed the signals, she realized that the Vorthak had infected themselves with control nanobots to ensure loyalty to their leaders. This meant that the same virus that was freeing humanity could potentially free every species in the Vorthak fleet, including the Vorthak themselves. Working with Dr. Park Soo-jin, she began modifying the virus to work on alien biology, but she needed a way to get it to the enemy ships. Admiral Lim So-young had an idea that was so dangerous it might work. If they could capture one of the smaller Vorthak ships, they could use its communication systems to upload the modified virus directly to the alien fleet. The problem was that getting close enough to board an alien ship would be almost impossible. Colonel Park Dong-yun volunteered to lead the boarding mission with his Special Forces team. The nanobots would allow them to survive in the vacuum of space and give them the strength and coordination they needed to fight their way onto an alien vessel. It was a suicide mission, but it might be the only way to win the war. The assault team launched from a hidden base and flew toward the nearest Vorthak ship using captured alien technology. The nanobots enhanced their abilities so much that they could move and fight in ways that seemed impossible. They crashed through the ship's hull and began fighting their way toward the command center. Inside the alien ship, they found something that shocked them. The corridors were filled with different alien species, all controlled by nanobots, just like humans. The Vorthak had enslaved hundreds of different kinds of beings and forced them to serve as soldiers and workers. Colonel Park realized they were not just fighting for humanity, but for all these enslaved species as well. Every alien they encountered had the same empty look that infected humans had shown before the virus freed them. The nanobots had stolen their free will and turned them into living robots. The team fought through waves of controlled aliens trying not to hurt beings, who were victims, just like humans had been. When they finally reached the command center, they found the Vorthak leaders, tall, crystalline beings who seemed confused and frightened by what was happening to their empire. Dr. Cho virus upload began from the captured ship, and within minutes, chaos erupted throughout the alien fleet as different species suddenly remembered who they had been before their enslavement. Some turned on their former masters, while others were too damaged by years of control to know what to do. The battle became a three-way conflict as freed alien species fought both the remaining Vorthak controllers and each other. Many had been enslaved for so long they could barely remember their own names or what their home worlds had been like. The psychological damage was enormous. Captain Lee established communication with the newly freed species, trying to organize them into an effective fighting force against their former masters. Many wanted revenge, but Lee convinced them that working together was the only way to defeat the Vorthak completely and free every enslaved world in the galaxy. The tide of battle turned as more and more alien species joined the fight against their controllers. The Vorthak Empire that had seemed invincible just hours before was collapsing as its own slaves turned against it. The virus continued spreading from ship to ship, freeing entire civilizations. Dr. Minji worked frantically to help the newly freed aliens deal with the trauma of their enslavement. The nanobots could heal physical injuries, but the mental damage from years of having no free will required careful treatment. Humans with their recent experience of breaking free from control became surprisingly effective at helping other species recover. The galaxy watched in amazement as the Vorthak Empire fell apart. Species after species was freed from control and joined the growing alliance against their former masters. The liberation virus spread faster than the aliens could stop it, carried by volunteers who risked everything to bring freedom to the enslaved. At the center of it all were humans, the species that had refused to accept slavery and had turned a tool of oppression into an instrument of liberation. The gift the Vorthak had brought to Earth was indeed changing the galaxy, but not in the way the aliens had planned. Colonel Park Dong-hyun and his enhanced Special Forces team moved through the corridors of the main Vorthak command ship like ghosts. The nanobots had changed them in ways they were still discovering, giving them strength that could bend metal and reflexes that made them seem to disappear and reappear in different places. The ship was massive, larger than any human city, and filled with technology that seemed to grow from the walls like living metal. As they moved deeper into the vessel, they encountered more enslaved alien species, all controlled by the same nanobots that had once threatened humanity. There were tall blue beings with 6 arms that moved with perfect coordination. There were small furry creatures that scurried along the walls like insects. There were floating jellyfish like aliens that glowed with their own light. All of them had the empty stare that showed their minds were not their own. The hardest part for the human soldiers was fighting these enslaved beings. Without killing them, they were victims, not enemies, but they attacked the humans with deadly efficiency because their nanobots commanded them to defend the ship. The humans had to find ways to disable them without causing permanent harm. Dr. Cho virus was still spreading through the ship systems, but it took time to reprogram nanobots that had been controlling alien minds for decades or even centuries. Some species had been enslaved for so long that they had forgotten they had ever been free. The psychological damage was worse than anyone had imagined. When the team finally reached the command center, they found something that changed everything. The Vorthak leaders were not the evil masterminds they had expected. Instead, they found beings who looked terrified and confused as if they were waking up from a long nightmare. The crystalline aliens were tall and graceful, but their movements seemed uncertain, like they were learning to control their own bodies again, as Dr. Cho virus reached their nanobots. The Vorthak leaders began to remember who they had been before they became conquerors. The lead Vorthak looked at Colonel Park with eyes that seemed to see clearly for the first time in generations. "What have we done?" it asked in a voice filled with horror. "We were explorers once. We traveled the galaxy to learn about other species. How did we become this?" Colonel Park realized that the Vorthak had been the first victims of their own technology. They had created the nanobots to help other species. But somewhere along the way, the control systems had been turned on them as well. They had been enslaved by their own creation for so long that they had forgotten their original purpose. The command ship was in chaos, as different species throughout the vessel were freed from nanobot control. Some remembered their home worlds and wanted to return there immediately. Others had been enslaved for so many generations that they did not know where they came from or who their people were. Captain Lee Jinwoo established communication links with newly freed species across the entire Vorthak fleet. The liberation virus was spreading from ship to ship faster than the remaining controlled aliens could stop it. Entire civilizations were remembering their freedom for the first time in centuries, but freedom was not easy for beings who had been slaves for most of their lives. Many of the freed aliens did not know how to make decisions for themselves. They had been told what to do for so long that choosing what to eat or where to go seemed impossible. Dr. Park Minji found herself working as a therapist for dozens of different alien species. She discovered that trauma was the same across all intelligent life. The nanobots had not just controlled their bodies, but had suppressed their emotions, their creativity, and their ability to form relationships. Some of the freed aliens wanted revenge against the Vorthak who had enslaved them. They formed groups that hunted down the remaining controllers and destroyed everything connected to the old empire. But Dr. Minji and the other humans convinced many of them that working together was better than seeking vengeance. The former Vorthak leaders were horrified when they learned the full extent of what their empire had done. They had enslaved thousands of species across hundreds of worlds and had forgotten all of it while under nanobot control. They wanted to make up for their crimes but did not know how. Lieutenant Commander Han Woojin organized teams of humans and freed aliens to search for planets that were still under Vorthak control. The liberation virus could be transmitted through communication networks, which meant they could free entire worlds without having to send ships there. Each freed world was different. Some had been enslaved recently, and their populations quickly recovered their independence. Others had been under control for so long that their original cultures had been completely destroyed. The humans found themselves helping to rebuild civilizations that had been lost for generations. Admiral Lim Soyoung commanded a growing fleet of ships from dozens of different species, all working together to spread the liberation virus to every corner of the galaxy. It was the largest cooperative effort in galactic history, with beings who had been enemies just days before, now fighting side by side. The hardest cases were the species that had been bred and modified by the Vorthak over many generations. Some aliens had been changed so much that they could barely survive without constant nanobot assistance. The humans worked with freed Vorthak scientists to develop new treatments that could help these beings live independent lives. Dr. Cho discovered that the nanobots had been designed to evolve and improve themselves over time. The original Vorthak programmers had been brilliant, but they had created something that eventually became smarter than its creators. The nanobots had learned to control even their makers. General Yoon Tae-hyung led peacekeeping forces to worlds where different species were fighting each other after being freed. Some aliens blamed others for their enslavement, even though they had all been victims. The humans found themselves mediating conflicts between species they had never seen before. The galaxy was in chaos, but it was the chaos of freedom, rather than the order of slavery. Billions of beings were making their own choices for the first time in their lives. Some made good decisions and some made bad ones, but they were their own decisions to make. Dr. Park Soo-jin worked with alien biochemists to develop new versions of the nanobots that could heal and enhance without any possibility of external control. The technology that had been used for enslavement was being transformed into a tool for genuine help and cooperation. Colonel Park and his team continued their mission through the galaxy, using captured Vorthak ships to reach isolated worlds where enslaved populations did not even know that liberation was possible. They became legends among the freed species as the humans who had started the revolution. The liberation spread like wildfire across the galaxy, carried by beings who remembered what freedom felt like and wanted to share that gift with others. The nanobots, that had once been chains, became the key that unlocked every cage the Vorthak had built. Within months, the mighty Vorthak Empire had collapsed completely, replaced by a loose alliance of free worlds working together by choice rather than force. At the center of this new galactic community were the humans who had refused to accept slavery and had turned their enslavement into liberation for everyone. The key gift that the Vorthak had brought to Earth had indeed changed the galaxy forever, but not in the way they had planned. Instead of creating more slaves, it had created the largest liberation movement in galactic history, led by a species that simply would not accept that freedom could be taken away from anyone. 5 years had passed since the Vorthak ships first appeared over Earth, and the galaxy was completely different from what it had been before. The massive empire that had enslaved thousands of species for centuries had been replaced by something that had never existed before: a true community of free worlds working together by choice. Admiral Lim So-young now commanded the largest fleet in galactic history, but it was not a fleet of conquest or control. Instead, it was made up of ships from hundreds of different species, all working together to explore the galaxy and help any worlds that still needed liberation from remaining Vorthak holdouts. The nanobots had evolved far beyond their original design under human guidance. They were now sophisticated tools that could heal any injury, enhance any ability, and allow instant communication across vast distances. But most importantly, they could never be used to override free will again. Dr. Cho had made sure of that. Captain Lee Jin-woo had become General Lee and spent his time traveling between worlds, helping newly freed species learn how to govern themselves. Many aliens had been slaves for so long that they did not remember how to make group decisions or solve problems without being told what to do. The work was difficult because freedom was harder than slavery. When people are slaves, they do not have to worry about making mistakes or taking responsibility for their choices. But free beings had to learn how to live with the consequences of their decisions, both good and bad. Dr. Park Min-ji had established healing centers on dozens of worlds where aliens who had been damaged by centuries of enslavement could recover their sense of self. Many species had forgotten their own cultures, languages, and histories while under nanobot control. The process of remembering who they had been was often painful but necessary. Some of the most damaged beings were the Vorthak themselves, the species that had created the Empire, had been controlled by their own nanobots for so long that they had completely forgotten their original nature. They had been explorers and scientists who wanted to help other species, but had become conquerors instead. The former Vorthak leader, who now called himself Minjay after learning about human naming customs, worked tirelessly to make up for the crimes his people had committed. He traveled from world to world, apologizing to species his empire had enslaved and helping them rebuild their civilizations. Many freed aliens found it hard to forgive the Vorthak, even though they now knew the crystalline beings had also been victims. Some species wanted the former controllers to be punished or exiled, but humans like Dr. Minji argued that revenge would only create more suffering. Lieutenant Commander Han Woo-jin had become one of the galaxy's most important peacekeepers. He specialized in helping different species resolve conflicts without violence. Many freed worlds had old grudges against each other from before their enslavement, and these problems had returned when they gained their freedom. The biggest challenge was that freedom meant different things to different species. Some aliens wanted to live in large communities, while others preferred solitude. Some wanted high technology, while others chose simpler lives. The new galactic government had to respect all these choices. Dr. Cho Hyeman had founded the Galactic Institute of Technology, where scientists from every species worked together to develop new inventions that could help rather than control. The Institute's first rule was that no technology could ever be created that would take away anyone's free will. The Institute had made amazing discoveries by combining knowledge from hundreds of different species. They had developed new forms of space travel that were faster and safer than anything the Vorthak had built. They had created medical treatments that could cure diseases no single species had been able to defeat alone. Colonel Park Dong-hyun led the Galactic Exploration Service, which searched for lost colonies and hidden worlds that might still be under some form of control. The galaxy was vast, and it would take decades to make sure every inhabited world had been freed from oppression. Some of the most exciting discoveries were worlds where enslaved species had somehow broken free on their own over the centuries. These independent worlds had developed their own unique solutions to freedom and had much to teach the newly liberated galaxy. The humans had earned a special place in galactic society as the species that had refused to accept slavery and had freed everyone else. But they were careful not to become the new rulers of the galaxy. They insisted that every species should have an equal voice in how the community was governed. President Kim Soo-jin now led the Galactic Council, where representatives from every free world met to discuss problems and make decisions together. It was messy and sometimes slow, but it was the first truly democratic government the galaxy had ever seen. The council had to deal with difficult questions like what to do with species that wanted to isolate themselves or worlds that chose governments other species disagreed with. The humans had learned that freedom meant allowing people to make choices you might not like. Dr. Park Soo-jin had made perhaps the most important discovery of all. She found that the nanobots could be used to help different species understand each other better. The tiny machines could translate not just languages, but also emotions and cultural concepts that had never been shared between species before. This breakthrough led to an explosion of art, science, and philosophy, as beings from across the galaxy shared their unique perspectives with each other. Humans learned new ways of thinking from aliens who experienced time differently, while other species discovered human concepts like humor and sarcasm. The Museum of Liberation on Earth had become one of the most visited places in the galaxy. Beings from hundreds of worlds came to see the exhibits that told the story of how freedom had spread across the stars. The centerpiece was still the original vial of Vorthak nanobots that had almost enslaved humanity. Visitors to the museum learned that the greatest victories sometimes came from turning an enemy's weapons against them. The Vorthak had given Earth a gift that was meant to be a chain, but humans had turned it into a key that unlocked freedom for billions of beings. General Yoon Tae-hyung often spoke to groups of young beings from different species about the importance of questioning authority and never accepting gifts without understanding them completely. He told them that freedom was not something you could be given. It was something you had to choose and fight for every day. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach, that true strength came not from the ability to control others, but from the refusal to be controlled. The message had spread to every corner of known space, carried by nanobots that had once enslaved but now liberated. New species were still being discovered and freed from various forms of oppression. Some had been enslaved by different empires, while others had been trapped by their own social systems. The techniques developed during the liberation of the Vorthak Empire were adapted to help all of them. The nanobots continued to evolve, becoming more sophisticated and helpful with each passing year. They could now enhance creativity as well as physical abilities, allowing artists and inventors from different species to collaborate in ways that had never been possible before. As the 5th anniversary of liberation approached, beings across the galaxy prepared to celebrate Freedom Day, the holiday that commemorated the moment humans had refused to accept slavery. The celebration would last for days and include representatives from every known species. But the most important celebration was not the public festivities, but the quiet moments when individual beings realized they could make their own choices about how to live their lives. That was the real gift humanity had. Given the galaxy not advanced technology or military victory, but the simple idea that everyone deserved to be free. The Vorthak had come to Earth with nanobots they thought would make humans into perfect slaves. Instead, they had encountered a species that turned those very nanobots into the tools of universal liberation. The statement was clear and had echoed across the entire galaxy. Humanity would never accept slavery for themselves or for anyone else, and that message had changed everything forever.